The revolving doors at Horizon PR released me into the September evening, the riverfront lights of Chicago flickering like a celebration I wasn't invited to. My heels struck the pavement in a rhythm that felt too sharp for the occasion. 32 years old today, senior executive with more accounts than I could juggle, and yet I carried myself home with the weight of a child who still hoped for balloons. By the time I reached my apartment in River North, my phone had remained stubbornly silent. No calls, no texts, no reminders that the day belonged to me. On the coffee table sat the cake I'd picked up that morning, single layer, white frosting, a candle standing at attention like a soldier waiting for orders. I set down my bag, stared at it for a moment, and turned away before the sting grew too sharp. Habit made me open my laptop, telling myself I'd bury the silence in another proposal draft. But one slip of the trackpad, and Facebook bloomed across the screen. The first post froze me. My brother Dane, standing poolside in Evanston, champagne glass aloft. Behind him, a banner stretched in neat blue letters. "Congratulations on your promotion." Photo after photo scrolled past our parents flanking him, cousins I hadn't seen in years, the entire Elwood clan gathered under string lights and neon reflections on the water, all of them smiling, celebrating, while my birthday passed unnoticed a few miles away. The unlit candle in my living room became heavier than any weight I'd carried from the office. I closed the laptop slowly, as though shutting a door on something too familiar, and leaned back against the cushions, knowing this erasure had not started tonight but years ago. The images from Dane's pool party stayed with me long after I shut the laptop. They weren't just tonight's betrayal. They were part of a thread woven through every stage of my life, tight enough to choke. At 11, I had worn my best dress to the family diner near the high school, waiting at a booth with a cupcake balanced on a chipped plate. My parents had promised they'd return in time from Dane's swim meet across town. I counted the minutes, candle burning low, until a waitress took pity and sang a soft, embarrassed version of Happy Birthday while other customers looked on. My family never came. When they arrived home that night, the trophy gleamed in Dane's hand, and my cupcake sat untouched in the fridge. 6 years later, on my 17th birthday, I packed an overnight bag for Grandma's house. My parents had arranged a weekend trip to Dartmouth, Dane's dream school. "It's his future, Maris," my father said, his tone final. Grandma baked me a pie and did her best to make the day feel special, but I felt the truth in every slice that I was an afterthought. Even college graduation offered no reprieve. Madison's spring air was bright, and I walked across the stage summa cum laude, certain for one fleeting moment that I might finally shine. But that evening, at the dinner meant for me, Dane stood up, clinking his glass to announce his engagement. The conversation shifted instantly, the spotlight moving as if I had never stepped on stage at all. My diploma felt weightless beside the diamond ring flashing on Jessica's hand. I learned to smile, to fade into the edges of photographs, to pretend it didn't matter. But watching the Evanston pool lights on my screen tonight, I knew the pattern wasn't accidental. It was tradition. The small cake on my table seemed to accuse me for waiting so long, its unlit candle echoing all the times my milestones had been dimmed, and I understood that tomorrow would demand something different. The morning after my birthday, I walked into Horizon PR's offices with the heaviness of the night still clinging to me, yet the world inside those glass walls spun on a different axis. Lawrence, our CEO, intercepted me before I'd even reached my desk, a folder in his hand and a rare spark of excitement in his eyes. "Maris, the quarterly numbers just came in," he said, pressing the papers toward me. 41% revenue growth on the Hanover campaign. The board is beyond pleased. I scanned the figures, my pulse quickening with each line. It was the kind of result most executives dreamed of, the sort of proof that silenced doubters. Lawrence's smile softened as he added, "You've earned this," and slipped an envelope onto my desk. Inside was the formal letter and confirmation an $82,000 performance bonus. For a moment, I couldn't move. My entire career had been spent clawing for acknowledgement, not just at home, but everywhere. Now here it was in black and white evidence that my work mattered, that my presence created measurable impact. I thanked him, voice steadier than I felt, and carried the envelope back to my office like it was something fragile. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving and allowed myself to taste victory, if only briefly. The city glowed outside my windows, headlights tracing lines of light across the river. My phone buzzed, and for one foolish heartbeat, I thought it might be someone finally remembering yesterday. "Mom," the screen read. I answered quickly. Hope rising despite everything. "Maris, darling," she began, her voice bright. Relief washed through me until she continued. "We're planning something for Dane and Jessica's anniversary next month, and I was hoping you could help with the catering and decorations. You're so good at those things." I gripped the stem of my glass, the words pressing into me with their casual cruelty. Not a mention of my birthday, not a question about my day, only another request to make Dane shine brighter. I murmured a vague agreement and ended the call, staring at the envelope on my desk. The bonus sat there like a crossroads, and I knew it wouldn't be long before my family tried to claim it as theirs. 2 days after that call, an unexpected notification appeared on my phone. A message thread blinked across the screen. The title, Elwood Family. I frowned. I'd never been invited into one of their group chats before. For a moment, I thought maybe finally they wanted to include me. Then the messages unfolded. Charles Maris should contribute at least $20,000 for Dane's anniversary. Venue and catering aren't cheap. Elaine. She just got that bonus time she supports family for once. I stared, pulse thrumming in my ears. 20,000, a quarter of what I had worked years to earn. I scrolled further. Jokes about how generous Dane had always been, how the legacy needed to be honored. And then, the final insult my name typed as Maris. 2 S's, not even corrected. It shouldn't have cut so deep, but it did. A lifetime of being overlooked condensed into a single typo. Not even my mother could be bothered to spell her daughter's name right while discussing how to siphon money from her. My hands shook as I locked the phone, setting it face down on my desk. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered with its usual confidence, but inside I felt something shifting, hardening. For years I had swallowed these moments whole, smiling, nodding, quietly accepting the erasure. But this was different. This was written proof. Undeniable and merciless. I picked the phone back up, rereading until the words blurred. Support the family. As if I had never supported them with silence, with patience, with all the years of standing in Dane's shadow. That night, the envelope with my bonus letter lay beside me on the table, its edges sharp against the dim light. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. And the anger didn't feel fleeting. It felt like fuel, carrying me toward the dinner they had planned for the weekend. The Elwood house in Winnetka looked as polished as ever, its white stone exterior glowing in the early evening light. I parked at the curb, my hands gripping the steering wheel longer than necessary. Walking up the path felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already written. Inside, the scene played out as predictably as a script I had memorized since childhood. My mother fussed with flowers in the dining room. My father poured himself a scotch by the fire, and Dane lounged on the sofa, tan from some weekend trip. We exchanged pleasantries over salmon and asparagus, the conversation circling inevitably toward my brother's achievements. Then, as dessert plates were set down, my father cleared his throat. "Maris, we need to discuss your contribution to Dane and Jessica's anniversary celebration." His voice carried the weight of command. "Not request." My mother chimed in quickly. Pearls catching the chandelier light. 20,000 would cover the venue and catering. Family supports. Family. Darling. For years, those words had been a leash. Tonight, I felt them snap. "I can't," I said quietly. The room stilled. Forks froze halfway to mouths. My father's brows knit together. "I beg your pardon, I can't contribute $20,000. I repeated, my tone steadier this time. "That's a quarter of my bonus. I have other plans for it." A silence spread across the table, thick and unyielding. My mother blinked, her smile faltering. "After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me?" The words slipped out before I could catch them. They hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. My father rose, looming over the table. "Ingratitude will not be tolerated in this house. Your brother is the real achiever. The least you can do is support him." My hands trembled as I gathered my purse, but my voice stayed firm. "Then I suppose I don't belong in this house." I walked out before the guilt could root itself in me again, the night air cool against my skin. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from Ivy. When I told her what had happened, she didn't hesitate. "What exactly have they done for you lately?" Her question lingered in the silence, pointing me toward an answer I had avoided for too long. The days after Winnetka passed in a blur of silence from my family, broken only by Ivy's steady voice reminding me that no was a complete sentence. Still, the echo of my father's anger and my mother's feigned tears lingered. I needed something more than words to prove I was done playing my part in their script. Late one night, I opened my laptop and typed Michigan lakefront property. The listings rolled across the screen: cabins, cottages, sprawling homes perched above wide blue water. One in particular held me: a cedar-shingled cottage near South Haven, built in the 1940s. 4 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a wraparound deck facing the lake. The photos showed mature pines hemming in the yard, the kind of quiet that looked like a promise. 2 days later, I stood on that deck, the September air sharp with the scent of water and wood smoke. The realtor explained the owners had already moved to Arizona. They were motivated to sell. My credit was solid, my bonus intact. For once, every piece aligned. "I'll take it," I heard myself say. The words sounded foreign, bold, but entirely right. At the closing, Mrs. Harrington sat beside me, her hands folded over her purse. She had insisted on coming, declaring that no one should sign papers for a new home alone. When the final document slid across the table, she placed her hand lightly over mine. "Sometimes freedom isn't a gift," she said softly. "It's a choice." I scrawled my name with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The keys slid into my palm, small and metallic yet heavier than anything I had carried home from an office. Driving back to Chicago with the deed tucked into my bag, I realized the Elwood family could keep their pool parties and staged photos. I had something better, a sanctuary of my own making, and a lock that only my key could open. The first weekend at the cottage, I woke to light streaming through wide windows and the sound of gulls sweeping low over the water. The air smelled of pine and possibility. I carried my coffee onto the cedar deck, barefoot, and took a photo almost without thinking just me. The lake stretching endless behind me, the railing still rough from fresh stain. On the caption line, I typed "birthday gift" to myself. Then I pressed post. By the time I rinsed my mug, my phone vibrated with a flood of notifications. 17 missed calls within the first hour. Dozens of texts piling on top of each other. My mother's name appeared again and again. "How could you do this without us? You're making the family look bad. Call me immediately." I set the phone down, letting it buzz itself into silence. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. That evening, the cottage filled with people who had shown up for me in ways my family never had. Ivy arrived first with a bottle of wine and her irreverent humor. Colleagues from Horizon followed, their laughter spilling across the rooms. Mrs. Harrington appeared last, carrying a quilt in shades of blue and green. "Every home needs something stitched with love," she said, pressing it into my arms. We grilled on the deck, music humming softly from a speaker, the lake catching the last gold of the day. I looked around at the faces glowing in the firelight, realizing I didn't need a family's approval to feel celebrated. I only needed people who saw me, who chose to be here. While my phone lit up inside with more accusations, I poured another glass of wine and raised it with my friends, knowing the real reckoning with my parents was still to come. The invitation to dinner came as a command, not a request. Sunday, 7 sharp. "We need to talk," my father's voice had said over the phone. Clipped and final. I drove to Winnetka with 3 photo albums stacked on the passenger seat and a folder of receipts tucked beneath them. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly the leather groaned. Inside, the mansion looked the same as always, grand, immaculate, a museum of appearances. My mother greeted me with tissues already in her hand, eyes rimmed with carefully smudged eyeliner. My father stood rigid by the fireplace, glass of scotch in hand. Dane shifted uneasily on the sofa, his wife's smile brittle beside him. We sat at the dining table, the good china gleaming under candlelight. My father wasted no time. "Your behavior has been reckless. Buying property without consulting us, broadcasting it online. This reflects poorly on the family." I slid the first album onto the table. "Let's talk about family." The pages opened to Dane's birthday's pool parties crowded with friends. A car wrapped in a bow at 18, parents beaming in every frame. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I placed the second album beside it. Sparse pages, store-bought cupcakes, a photo of me at 11 with Grandma, the only candle already half melted. "This is mine," I said. My mother's hand trembled as she turned the empty pages. The third item was a spreadsheet, highlighted and color-coded. Tuition paid in full for Dane, partial scholarships for me, vacations abroad for him, summer camps for me, thousands against hundreds. The numbers told their own story. Finally. I unfolded a diary page in faded pencil. Maybe next year they'll remember my birthday without Grandma calling. The silence that followed was heavier than the air itself. My mother began to cry, this time without calculation. My father's face flushed dark, his voice strangled. Dane's eyes stayed fixed on a photo of himself at 8. My younger face blurred in the background, smiling too tightly. I gathered my bag but left the albums and papers in the center of the table. "Consider them a gift," I said, and walked out into the night, the weight I carried shifting into something sharper resolve for whatever came next. The following weekend, I drove back to South Haven with the trunk of my car filled with groceries, wine, and flowers. The air felt different as I unlocked the door, lighter somehow, as if the cottage itself had been waiting for me to arrive with company. This time, the silence wasn't loneliness, it was anticipation. By late afternoon, the rooms began to fill. Ivy appeared first, arms loaded with bags of food, her laugh carrying through the hallway before I even saw her. Soon, colleagues from Horizon followed, shaking off the drive from Chicago, setting bottles on the counter and slipping out onto the deck to admire the lake view. The house that had once been only an idea on a realtor's listing now pulsed with warmth and voices. As the sun dipped low, we gathered on the deck with plates of grilled food balanced on our laps. Ivy raised her glass and grinned. "To the woman who chose herself," she said, her voice steady but eyes bright with pride. The cheer that followed was louder than any toast I'd ever heard in my parents' dining room. Mrs. Harrington arrived just as twilight colored the water. She pressed a bundle into my arms, a quilt pieced together in blues and greens, stitched by hand. "Every home deserves something made with love," she whispered. I blinked back tears as I unfolded it across the back of a chair, the fabric catching the last gold light of the day. For the first time in 32 years, my birthday was marked not by absence or disappointment, but by presence by people who had shown up because they wanted to, not because they were obligated. I sat back, letting their laughter wash over me, and felt a sense of belonging I had stopped believing was possible. The quilt draped across the chair behind me seemed less like a gift and more like a foundation. And I knew as I looked out at the lake that this tradition would begin here and grow only stronger. By the time my 33rd birthday arrived, the cottage no longer felt new. The walls bore framed photos from campaigns I had led, shelves sagged with books I'd promised myself time to read, and the quilt from Mrs. Harrington lay folded across the sofa like a constant reminder that love could be stitched together. I had been promoted to senior director at Horizon that spring, and tonight the house once again filled with the voices of friends who had become family. The deck buzzed with conversation, glasses clinking against the backdrop of Lake Michigan turning gold in the late light. Ivy raised a toast, calling me the best risk-taker she knew, and laughter rolled easily through the air. For once, joy didn't feel fragile, it felt earned. When a car pulled into the gravel drive, I expected another colleague arriving late. Instead, it was Dane. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the deck, a package in his hands. "I wanted to give you this," he said quietly. Inside the wrapping was a restored photograph, me at 7, hair tangled, laughing on a tire swing. "Found it in Dad's boxes," he explained. "Thought you should have it." Later, after the crowd thinned, my mother appeared at the door, a small bakery box trembling in her hands. Inside was a single cupcake with one candle. "Carrot cake," she said, her voice catching. "You always liked it." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. As the sun sank and the last of my guests drifted inside, I stood on the deck with the photo in one hand and the cupcake in the other. I lifted my glass toward the horizon, no longer waiting for recognition to come from them, but knowing I could create it myself.